Hello, I'm Dr. David Johnson, Professor of Medicine and Chief of Gastroenterology at Eastern Virginia Medical School in Norfolk, Virginia. Well, the use of sugary component additives has been insidious over the westernized diet over the last several decades. Is that good or not good? And is it more sickeningly sweet? And we'll talk to that. Or do we turn the paradox to non-caloric sweeteners and use that instead? Let's focus on both. First, on the caloric beverage in particular, these have been all laden with, in particular, high fructose corn syrup. It's a component of sweetening, which is cheaper and sweeter than cane sugar, and I've reviewed some of the component concerns with you in the past. Animal models have suggested an association with acceleration of colorectal neoplasia and actually incorporation of the fructose into the cancer, which almost feeds itself. So again, an animal model looking at colon cancer. Certainly there have been component studies, Nurses Health Study recently, a published study in gut showing the odds ratios are increased by twofold or greater for consumers of two or more of sugary beverages a day. And this is something that, again, has caught a lot of attention. Nonetheless, it's such a norm for so many people. Whether or not that becomes a concern for allegation of harm remains to be discussed with individuals. But then the influence of inflammatory bowel disease also has been a significant focus as well. The idea that the sugary beverages may have an inflammatory component. We've seen also association with inflammation as it relates to increased risk for diverticulitis in the patients that consume the sugary beverages. But now a recent study is also looking at the European database and the United Kingdom Eurobank data bank. They actually looked at 500,000 cohorts and looked at using a validated database for dietary intake, found that the intake of two or more sugary beverages a day increased the likelihood of development of colitis, in particular overall colitis 1.51 ratio. That was not statistical based on the confidence intervals. It was statistical for Crohn's disease, twofold greater, and it was not quite statistical, although a trend at 1.31 for ulcerative colitis. So what does this tell us? Well, that there is growing concern about the use of sugary beverages, in particular the caloric sugary beverages, as it relates to a variety of things. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, no question, that's been associated. The growing risk for colitis and is infamous for the recent study, and also for colorectal neoplasia. So should we shift our patients from the caloric sugary beverages and additives and processed foods to the non-caloric? And the answer is maybe no there as well. Dr. Eran Elanov and his group of brilliant investigators at the Weizmann Institute in Israel have published, at least from animal models, showing that there was, in use of artificial sweeteners, there was a microbial change which actually predisposed to obesity and diabetes. And they did this in a controlled fashion. And most recently, in their most recent study in Cell, they actually have published now a randomized controlled trial in humans using the four top non-caloric sweeteners from saccharin, sucralose, aspartame, and stevia in a controlled fashion. They were receiving 2 sachets of these 3 times a day. Control was with glucose sachet. And the endpoint was looking at biomic changes. There was biomic change in all the patients, the healthy controls consuming these agents, compared to the control population. And there was actually glycemic interference as it relates to the saccharin and the sucralose, where these patients, when given a glucose tolerance test, had impaired glycemic indices. They actually then transposed the stool from these individuals, all of which had biomic changes in all 4 groups, into mice and germ-free mice, and the mice actually mirrored the glycemic response of the individuals as it related to whatever the individual agent was. So what it tells us is that the non-caloric sweeteners may in and of themselves have biomic harm as it relates to biomic change, and there may be an individualized response based on the biomic change in a particular patient. Whether or not that predisposes them to glycemic alteration, that again remains to be seen further in prospective studies. But nonetheless, these data are quite impressive, certainly back up what they've shown on an animal model. So where are we? Well, the caloric sugary beverages are probably not such a good thing, and I routinely recommend against these. It's part of my counsel on a recommendation of westernized diet. They should be avoided. The Mediterranean diet really is the way to go. The artificial sweeteners, we still are on the learning curve in this, but may not be the best thing. Think of the paradox. We're using these in patients that potentially are glycemic, predisposed to diabetic, obese patients, and may actually have the paradoxic response in predisposing those patients. So what do I tell my patients? Well, I think avoid these things as best you can, moderation if you absolutely have to. The best advice is drink more water. I think that's really a safe one, at least in present time. Dietary manipulation and advice, I think we don't do a very good job. We needed to be more proactive in this. We are what we eat and drink. And certainly, I think we can be more proactive in this in our advice for patients. Hopefully this provides you some better counsel when you talk to your patients going forward. I'm Dr. David Johnson. Thanks again for listening.